Welcome to History Tidbit number 19, Paul Piedad. My name is Helen Alton, and I am the director of the Haynes Sheldon Museum. The month of May is Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. In honor of this, for our final History Tidbit of May, we would like to share the story of an early and beloved Chilkat Valley resident of Filipino heritage, Mr. Paul Piedad. Like many of us today, Paul Piedad arrived in Haynes for a job, fell in love with the area, and ended up staying for the rest of his life. Born in 1892, Piedad came to Haynes in 1915 at the age of 23 to work as a houseboy for an Army officer at Fort Seward. The officer had been stationed in the Philippines prior to Alaska. Most of what we know about Piedad in the museum archives comes from a recollection written by Elizabeth Hakkinen, founder of our museum. Unfortunately, in her account, Lib never names the officer directly, so it is difficult to know whether he was stationed in the Philippines during the Philippine-American War, which was 1899 to 1902, or shortly after when it became a U.S. territory. Prior to this, the Philippines had been colonized by Spain. Piedad's surname is actually the Spanish Piedad, or piety. Per Lib Hakkinen's recollection, she spent a lot of time as a toddler visiting the officer and his wife. The family had previously lost their young daughter, and they were besotted with Lib, who was born in 1914. Lib relates many enjoyable tales about Paul, including watching and, quote, helping Paul make donuts and cookies at the officer's residence. Piedad called her Little Lady. When the officer's family was transferred elsewhere, Piedad elected to remain in Haynes, where he became part of the community and eventually had a road named after him. And here he is next to a glacier. We don't know the date of that particular photo. Like many Haynes residents, Piedad worked a variety of jobs. Although we do not know when the Fort Seward officer's family left Haynes, we do know that Paul Piedad was working as a deckhand aboard the Army transport H.B. Peterson in 1918. The Peterson is seen here at port in this photo taken sometime between 1914 and 1927, and the logbook of the Peterson is in the archives at the museum. HB stands for harbor boat. The H.B. Peterson was one of the ships that witnessed the sinking of the Princess Sophia in 1918. It is very likely that Piedad witnessed this great tragedy known as the Titanic of the North. After his time aboard the Peterson, Piedad worked as the primary camp cook at the road camp of the Alaska Road Commission, starting in the 1920s. This is a photograph of the camp, which was taken prior to 1920, slightly before Piedad worked there. But you can see the cookhouse here, and these are probably the bunkhouses. We do not have exact dates for his time at the road camp. During the 1920s, the road was being pushed through to Canada. Commuting to work was not feasible. The Alaska Road Commission, or ARC, would set up camp during the summer work season on site where the workers could live and be near their jobs. The camp had to be moved periodically as work and the road progressed north. Piedad traveled along with it. And this is a photograph of Paul Piedad standing outside doing dishes, and it's likely taken at the road camp during his time as cook. It was customary for the camp cook to keep coffee ready for workers and passing visitors. Because of his baking prowess and personable attitude, Piedad usually offered something to go with the coffee. His specialty was dried apple pie. These culinary skills might have contributed to our local pronunciation of his name as Piedad. In fact, Lib notes that, quote, for a long time, most of the children in town believed he was called Piedad because he made such formidable pies. Besides pies, he kept a bin full of cake donuts flavored with spices and rolled in a special coarse sugar. Another snack he offered were sweet mixed pickles. He sent Lib a gallon of pearl onion pickles, her favorite, for her birthday when she went off to college in Southern California. During his tenure as camp cook, Piedad ran a boarding house in the winter off-season for local bachelors, some of whom were part of the summer road crew. Besides cooking for the crew of the road camps, Paul Piedad also, on occasion, cooked special dinners for officers on the post. During the 30s and 40s, he bartended at what is now the Harbor Bar and worked on Carl Bjornstad's store on Main Street. He became a fixture in the Haines community. Here is a group photo taken at a picnic of Haines residents in the 20s or 30s. Piedad is seen standing next to Eric Osland. Now let's check out a few photos of Piedad in this era from our collection. This image was taken inside Carl Bjornstad's store in 1935. Paul Piedad and Carl Bjornstad are standing behind the counter here. In front of the counter, Florence and Richard Young, these two children, and their mother, Susie Young, are standing. And off to the side are Dale Nelson Bracken with his grandmother, Mrs. B.A. Barnett, and an unidentified man. Here's another photo taken at Bjornstad's store 5 years later in 1940. From left to right are Neil Duty, go back to that. Neil Duty, Jack David, Art Johnson, Paul Piedad, and owner Carl Bjornstad. In 1934, Piedad inherited the Harbor Bar building from previous owner Harry Lyons. Rather than start his own business in the building, Piedad leased it for commercial use, becoming a landlord. Under his ownership between 1934 and 1961, the building served as a commissary for Foley Brothers Company, commissary, a grocery store owned by Jack Ward, and finally as the Harbor Bar. This photo shows the building in the 1950s when it was the grocery, J.B. Ward and Sons. During his lifetime, Piedad lived in several different locations in and around Haines, at the fort, on the west side of Front Street, and finally on the road that now bears his name, Piedad Road. This photo was taken on the porch of his house on West Front, likely between Main and Dalton. Piedad is sitting between Brother Page and Joe Mackenzie. Page was a beekeeper, and Mackenzie was a foreman for the Alaska Road Commission. Later at Piedad, his house was at the very end of the road. Piedad remained a lifelong bachelor. He passed away in April 1961. Although he had no children, his name lives on in a street name. He is remembered as being a friendly, likable person who smoked cigars that were as long as he was tall. Libs quoted, a quote from Elizabeth Hakkinen, is Paul's floppy winter fur hat, his ever-present cigar, sometimes it was even lighted, his friendly grin, and the sparkle in his eyes were familiar around Haines for many years. Like many of us, Paul Piedad wandered from afar and stayed. Piedad embodies the resiliency, good humor, and willingness to work that help us survive in our remote wilderness outpost. It is inspiring that he, an Asian minority at a time when there was a significant amount of anti-Asian feeling in America, became an important and beloved community member. Thank you for listening to this quick history tidbit number 19 from the Haines Sheldon Museum. Visit our website for educational materials, including the full excerpt of Lib Hakkinen's Musings from the Haines Sheldon Museum, and further readings on Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. The seasons are changing, and so are we. After 9 weeks of history tidbits twice a week, we have decided to cut back to once a week, and we'll be airing, beginning this week, History Tidbits only on Wednesdays at 12 noon Alaska time on Facebook Live. As our staff is returning to the building this week and next week, we are adjusting our routine and preparing for the soft opening of in June of Alaska Suffrage Star, which is celebrating the 100th anniversary of women winning the vote. This exhibit will be on display during June. Admission is by advance appointment only. We're working on the details now to make sure that the staff and the visitors are as safe as we can manage. So stay tuned for exact procedures and information in our official Facebook announcement tomorrow. And in the meantime, join us again next week on Wednesday, June 3rd, for History Talk number 20, Early Tourism in Haines. And then the following weekend on June 10th for History Talk number 21, Haines Native Band. Thank you so much. I'm Helen Alton. Have a good rest of your week.